So hi there, Derpy Moose 99 here. So you've been there, you've played this game, you learned how to do the basics, and you killed your town. So you got frustrated, you restarted, you got about 80 or 90 people, and everybody died again. So I'm going to give you 12 steps, or 12, I think more 12 concepts that if you understand those and apply them, will help you build large towns. Just one caveat, I am not the best Banished player in the world, but I've played for a while and I know a few things. So if somebody experienced watches this and I'm making mistakes or there's things to add, please do so. All right, tip number one. I'm not going to do a focus or I'm not going to do a start tutorial here, but the tip is be focused at the start. To get through the first winter, you need a food source, a reliable food source, preferably a 24-hour one like a gatherer. You need a place for the gatherer to put the food, which is a barn. You need one house and one house only. People will go into the barn to get food and they will go into somebody else's house to warm up. So one house only. Then after you have the gatherer, for example, a barn and one house, you build a wood chopper and you get some firewood. Hundreds probably enough, probably more than enough. Once the firewood is done, your next priority is getting tools. So you put up a blacksmith. You have a little bit more time on that in the first couple. Um, After that, oh, sorry, one note here. Some people make coats a priority. Don't do that. They can go a couple of years without coats. I think I did a Let's Play once where I didn't build a tailor until the 17th year. Completely forgot. Made absolutely no difference. Okay, so that's the first tip. Stay focused. And year one is the most difficult part. If you build extra things, too many things, unnecessary things, you kill the town. Okay, the next concept I think is probably the most important concept of all here, and that's called travel time. So if we look at this person here, we've got a herbalist and a hunter in that house. We take our pathing tool and we see that they are working down here. So the way this works is they get up in the morning and they walk to work. Okay, they work, they go out and do the thing out here. And when they have stuff or they have meat to put in the barn or something like that, they walk back to the barn. Now, then once they're finished working for the day, they'll go back home. They'll have something to eat. They'll warm up. If there's not enough stuff in the house and there's inventory in the houses, right? They will go to the nearest barn to get it if it has it, or they will go to a market. And the idea of a market is to pull everything together. So what all this means is you want to maximize the amount of time they're actually able to work. So if this house was here and say we had a hunter, I don't know, way over here somewhere, by the time that person got up in the morning and walked to work, they'd probably do about 2 minutes of work at most, get hungry, and walk back home. So if you have that kind of setup where you don't have any houses near your buildings and you're not getting much production, that is exactly why, and that is the only reason why. Okay, now from travel management as well too, it becomes obvious that you want houses close to the places to work, and you also want storage near places of work. So you need like type storage. So if you have foresters getting logs, then you need a stockpile nearby. If you have gatherers getting food, you need a barn nearby. Okay? And you also wise to have a market nearby, because what a market does is gathers everything up from the surrounding area and gives a common central point for people to get stuff. Now it's both people from a housing perspective, but also from a working perspective too, like ore and things like that. Okay, time management is, or travel management is critical. Okay, and that is tip number two. Tip number three is around education in schools. So going to school has the upside of making your people 25 to 50% roughly more efficient. There's a couple of things to think about though. When people attend school, instead of turning into a laborer at 10, they turn into a student, and they could be in that school anywhere from, say, 5, even 12 years, depending. Now, what the length of time depends on is, again, traveling, right? If your school is way too far away from your houses, the students will spend more time traveling than they will in school. and that results in additional years spent in school. So you also want to manage your schools relatively close to your houses. And as you can see here, I have two in this town, relatively small sized town. Now, partly that's for redundancy, but it's also for proximity to housing and stuff like that. Okay, now the other question with the school is when to put them in. Now, keep in mind what I said. If you don't have a school, people turn 10 and they become workers. Less efficient workers, but workers. So if you put a school in and then all the kids from that point forward, you will lose anywhere from say 5 to 8 years of the productive time of those kids. So they'll just be sitting in school and eating your food, but not doing anything for you. Now the net effect is the productivity, but the point is you have to be prepared for that lull, okay, of not getting new laborers and not having additional capability to feed people. So although an early school as possible is advisable, what you have to make sure is your food production, your tool production, and your firewood is adequate to carry you through that span of time. Okay, so that's education, and that was point number three. Okay, now point number four is called yellow circle management. Now, what this is all about is buildings that gather, or collect, I should say, have yellow circles. Now, the concept here is there's a couple of things that are important about this. You want this to be flat land, and if it's a gatherer or a herbalist, you basically want this to be in forested area. Now you can start with an area that's not so forested, as long as you have a forester lodge in there that's planting. Okay. Um, you don't want duplicate buildings of the same type in here. So two gatherers in the same area won't do anything for you. It'll just chew up extra people to no net effect. Okay, so one of each and no duplicates. You also want to manage not only flat land here, but you want to get rid of all the iron and stone out of here. Okay, I mean, you're going to do that, or you're going to want to do that anyways to build stuff. But getting that out of there leaves more rooms for trees, herbs, and other things to grow. Okay, yellow circle management there. Up here in the fishing area, where I've got two fishing docks set up. Now, I've seen people put, like, say, 4 fishing docks all in a row, shoulder to shoulder, side by side. Complete waste of time. Good idea, waste of time. So, again, you don't want more of one of the same thing in the collection circle. You also want a magic collection circle so there's no trading docks or other things there. Now, here's one here where I put in a bridge that's going to impact the productivity of this fishing dock a little bit. But I figured it was more important in this case to build the bridge to get access to this nice valley up here, okay? So don't overlap these and don't have other buildings in the fishing circles, okay? And that is yellow circle management. And that was point number four. All right, so point number five is taking into account the issues and items we've talked about so far is basically the overall architectural design strategy. Now, keep like travel time is super critical here, okay? So typically a start, you're going to build a forest node. You're going to have a little bit of a town center, maybe another forest node or two or even three. And then you're going to want to expand somewhere. So how do you expand? Now, what you want to do is expand nearby. You know, whether it's up, down, sideways, doesn't matter. So you're going to want to lay a stone road in if you can, because stone roads are quicker. Keep in mind that building stone roads too much if you don't have an adequate stone supply will end in tears, okay? But stone road out, you want to build a stockpile and a couple of houses, and that facilitates the build. And then you want to build a market. And what the market will do is the vendor in there will go fetch food, tools, and construction material for the people in the area. Then you want to do whatever building you want. So in this particular case, this is my second expansion town center. And I decided to do orchards and farms and pastures here and add a second trading dock. My next expansion, I decided that there was a lovely little valley over here that would be good for another forest node. And I think I was running short of logs at the time. So stone road over here, a couple of houses were built, Um, and then the forest node was constructed. Now, a note on the houses in the forest node. I've seen a lot of people that don't put houses in the forest node, and in my experience, the benefits of putting them here in travel time elimination vastly outweighs the effect of taking away the 4x4 space for the growers here. So keep that in mind. Now, the idea with expansion, and this is probably not the best map to talk about it, but you don't want to expand all along in a straight line. I kind of did that a little bit here, but don't carry on. Like if this was a huge map, don't carry on over here. You want to stay in a bit of a ball or a circle or a square or however you want to look at it. So my next expansion was up over here, okay? And then properly I would be expanding to the right over here and then down, okay? And that what that does, if this huge lake wasn't here, is the travel time, right? So say, and you have to pretend with me that this lake doesn't exist. So say somebody over here needs something from up here, right? They would walk diagonally across instead of like maybe if you expand in a linear fashion way over here. So the point being, don't be helter-skelter about your expansion. Think about travel time and the travel time between areas. If you do have a long way to travel, consider throwing a house part way. Um, and remember, they won't eat in other people's houses, but they'll stop to warm up. So there's a bit of a downside with that in that the people that live in the house, the students will, probably have a school super far away. There'll be students forever, and the adults will have a long way to walk, but it'll keep people from dying if you do have long travel time. Okay, so general architecture, think in terms of town centers. Do your expansions, stockpile, like roads, stockpile, couple houses, market. Now you're established, and then go to building. Okay, and that's point number 5, overall architecture. Okay, point number 6, I want to talk about population growth, population management. So fundamentally, bannies become of age at 10. Now, if there's no school, they'll become a laborer. If there's a school, they'll go to school. If they go to school and they're students, at some point in time, they'll graduate and they'll be laborers. Now, bannies can have children from age of 10 to age of 40, up until the age of 40. And the other thing to think about housing here is bannies will not have children in their parents' house. So if you have, say, and here's a bad example of me mismanaging here, but in this house here, and by the way, the houses only hold 5, so this couple here cannot have any more children until these people move out. Another thing to consider. But there's a 22-year-old and a 23-year-old, so they're not going to have children with anybody until they're moved out in a house of their own. So if you're trying to grow quickly, or you're short people or whatever, make sure anybody that's of age or is a laborer is probably the right way to say it. Get them out of the house, okay? And if it's early and it's only one person, they don't have a spouse, do it anyways, right? Because these houses, and be aware that some houses in mods only have room for 3 or 4 people. These ones have 5. But if you hit your children limit, right, there'll be no more children had here. So if you're trying to grow quickly, manage that. The other thing on that is a student will not move out by themselves, but if there's somebody that's graduated already in a house and they need a spouse, a student will graduate and join that person. Or no, will not, sorry, won't graduate, but they will join that person. Okay? So why these concepts are important is if you're way short on people and you want to manage everybody into a house, if you if you grow too fast and if you grow beyond your food supply, that means you're probably building too many houses. So kind of a happy median is every year build 3 or 4 houses or something like that until you grow to a large size. If you don't build any houses, the danger is you'll have an aging problem. So if everybody in your town, stays in their parents' house and ages up beyond 40 years of old, at 40 years of age, you will have a situation where nobody in your town can have a child anymore, and you'd be hoping for nomads. Otherwise, your town's going to die, okay? So find the happy medium for you and your tactical situation on food supplies and stuff like that. Now, typically what I'll do in a new town is I'll take a maximum growth strategy, and it puts a little bit of pressure on getting food and stuff like that, but it gets you more workers and the ability to do more things. But be very aware of your population, the age, how many houses you have versus how many families you have. A really good rule of thumb is take the number of adults and have half as many houses as that. You can use your town hall here. It does have a metric of homes versus families, and you can see here I'm way behind. Um, so there's a couple different ways to look at that. But think about where you're at in the game. Do you want to grow quickly or do you want to slow down the growth? And that is population management, number 6. Okay, point number 7 is around farms, pastures, and orchards. So I see a lot of people building like really small farms or really big farms, maybe putting half a dozen people in the farm or whatever, right? So there is a website called banishedinfo.com that's got a neat little tool that calculates visually how big a farm needs how many workers and how much food you get out of that. Generally, it's accepted that 11 by 11 or 10 by 12 or somewhere around 120 squares is a good size for one worker to manage. The other option, which I kind of personally like, is a 15 by 15 with 2 people. And the reason I like that one is farmers become laborers in the winter. If your town becomes large, people wander off to do jobs. When spring comes, they hurry back to plant. Now, if that's a long way for them to travel, you lose a lot of productivity. And having 2 people in a field of 15 um, gives you a better chance, I think, under those conditions. Productivity, they're about the same. The 11 by 11 with one's a little bit better. The other thing around fields and orchards here, if you have disasters on and you get an infestation, try not to have the same kind of crops directly next to each other. Here's an example here of where I've blown that. There's cabbage there and cabbage there. If one of these fields got infected, it could spread to the other field, but it won't spread to different crop types. So you can see here I kind of got a checkerboard thing going on with, orchards and farms and that. That's basically to avoid that crop adjacency for infestations. On the topic of pastures, if a pasture gets infected, what you're going to want to do is rather than kill all the animals, you want to have a quarantine pasture where you can just move people out or the animals out and then you can move them back later if you want. To make that workable, try and keep your pastures to a uniform size. If you have lots of room, typically 20 by 20 pastures with 2 workers, it works wonderfully, and that's your maximum size for production. This particular case here, I didn't have that kind of room, so I figured out what a uniform size would be, and I put them in and left one spare for quarantines. Yeah, the last point on farms and orchards and pastures is the health of the Banished depends on 4 food types. So there's fruit, vegetable, grain, and protein. So the hearts or the health depends on those things for a lot of it, right? You can do half a heart with herbs and a few other things, but fundamentally the diet is really important. Okay, so think about that when you're purchasing seeds and making planting decisions. Is you want to have fruit, veg, grain, and protein. Okay, and that is point number 7: farms, orchards, and pastures. Point number 9 is around hospital location. So occasionally you will get outbreaks of disease, even if you have disasters turned off, by the way. Sometimes this can be additionally triggered by nomad arrival if you accept them. So the way sickness works in Banished is people get sick by proximity. So if they're within close proximity to each other, they'll pass on the infection. This also includes if people are in a building. So if you were to build your hospital, say right in the downtown core here with heavy traffic of people running by, then the infected person would get sick. What they do is they actually finish the current job they're assigned and then they'll go to the hospital. While they're in the hospital, people that walk by outside stand a really high chance of getting infected. What this means, if you make this mistake, your plague will snowball and you're going to be in danger of losing your whole town to an epidemic. So what you want to do is have your hospitals out of town in low traffic areas. So if I activated this here, you'd see nobody walking by, right? Now you wouldn't want to put it out in the forest, no, because you got the gatherers and the hunters and all that stuff. The bigger your town gets, you might have to move these out farther, and you might have to add a few more around the map because people do walk. So if this was a really big town, you wouldn't want sick people over here walking all the way through the village to get to this hospital, right? So put them remote and distribute them around fairly evenly if you can. Now, you don't have to have them staffed all the time. Just know where they are so you can turn them on. And that is point number 9, hospitals. Okay, point number 10, most people know this one already, but I just want to cover a few things. So make sure you got a heads up display here. So you want your town summary, and that gives you a great overview on where you're at with your inventory. You want a professions tab so you can keep track of that. And the main thing here is you're watching for your labor builder balance and making sure you never go to zero laborers if you have schools, right? So if your teacher dies and laborers are the replacement pool, there's nobody to replace the teacher. Your kids empty out in the street, cause havoc. Okay? You want your event summary, but this thing here can drive you particularly bananas if audible alarms cause you issues like they do me. So these icons up here light up when there's an audible alarm. So this one here is actually the notification for resource shortage. So especially early in the game, you'll have this thing going off like 400 times a second. And for me, that drives me absolutely crazy. So know that you can click these on and off. And I always click that one off. Now I see a lot of people with the resource limit thing on the screen. Note that that's strictly unnecessary, in my opinion. At the start of the game, you can go and tweak a few things. You might want to check it once in a while. The big one is to make food 1,000,000, or 1,000,000 minus 1, I guess, right from the start. But typically you can manage through building. So, if you see that your tool limit is a little bit low, your town's getting big, you just go in here and click it, right? So you don't necessarily need this one out, and you don't necessarily need a map out either. Um, One last thing on the HUD. I've seen a lot of people that don't seem to use the camera hotkeys, and I don't know if it's because through choice or they just don't know about it. So down under the tools and reports, which is the gear icon here, there's this little camera thing. So it has 5 presets for camera location. So there's ZX, CVB, and this is super handy. So I typically set my main town would be here. That's Z, that's my beginning location. And then I would set maybe my first expansion is B, my third expansion is C, that kind of thing. And you can change that as you go. So if you want to quickly get around, or say a good example is if you had all your traders, say I had all my traders here, about 10 traders, you can click on the blue button, but you can also hotkey that. So if you get pretty good at setting the hotkeys and remembering to use them, you can bop around the map pretty quick and get a good idea of what's going on. Okay, so point number 10, heads up display and camera. Okay, point number 11. Now I'm calling this build ahead. So here's the story, right? You're playing along, everything's good, you have lots of food, and you get involved in something and you look up and you're out of food, right? Or tools is the other thing that's going to happen, or firewood, right? So the 3 rapid death spirals are running out of food, running out of tools, and running out of firewood. Now, if you run out of tools, and this is a good example, if you run out of tools, people become like way less effective. I think it's around 50%. Don't quote me on that. So if you're out of tools, you're in this goofy position of you want to build a bunch of blacksmiths, you want to mine a bunch of iron, you want to get a bunch of logs, and you want to make a bunch of tools. Well, guess what? You're screwed, right? Because everybody's working at 50% or less capability, and you're just going to fall further and further behind the 8 ball. The same goes with some other things too, right? It's hard to farm if you're starving. Like if you're out of food, people just run around looking for food. They don't do actual activity like farm, okay? So build ahead. So here I'm running on 2 blacksmiths and I have a spare, right? Here now, because I'm trading firewood, I have like 10 woodcutters for a fairly small town, right? But the same concept there. Have a couple woodcutters pre-built and ready to go. For farms, I've got, you know, only one orchard here, but a couple of pastures. And I've actually, in my expansion up here, I've got 4 fishing docks ready to go. Now my food's really good right now, but I'll be turning these on slowly, one at a time as I need them. But if I get distracted and in a panic and I run out of food, I've got 4 fishing docks. Like, that's a little bit extreme, but I've got places that I can turn on to get more food. Okay? So build ahead and be wise about it. Okay? So that leads me into a point that I actually missed earlier in my notes. So I want to go back to. Okay, so this all leads me to my next point, which is point number 12. Love your town hall. Now, this thing is expensive to build, so be careful about when you build it. Although, if you're playing mods, there's cheaper alternatives. But what this thing does for you on the first page, let's run through this quickly. We get metrics of how many homes you have versus how many families need homes. It gives you your clothing status, your education status, health status, and all that kind of stuff, which is all good. Numerically, this gives you productivity. So, for example, food here used in the last year, produced last year, okay, and used in year and produced. You can look at the same thing for tools and etc. I prefer the graph here, so I encourage you to live by the 5-year food graph. Now, not the numbers. Numbers don't matter. It's the trend line you want to look at. Is your food storage increasing? Or is it decreasing? Excuse me, or is it level? Now, sometimes you think you're okay for food. Like I say, you get doing something else and suddenly you're out of food. If you watch this graph like a hawk, you can spot those trends occurring well before it impacts your people. So right now I'm looking at this, I'm saying, okay, I'm on a growth curve here. If I came in here and this was flat, I'd be thinking, okay, um, that means that I'm growing out, my population is starting to outgrow my food supply, and I better get some stuff built. If you come in here and the trend is going down, what you need to do is stop whatever else you're doing and get a whole bunch of food on the go. Okay? So if you do nothing else in this town hall, go to the 5-year food graph and embrace it as a religion. Okay? Now, other useful thing in here is, and you want to do things deliberately, right? So if you're going to trade or things like that, what you want to do is understand what your supplies are, what you have a lot of, and manage things through this inventory screen. So if you make it a fairly regular routine to come in here, have a look at your housing situation, have a look at your food graph, have a look at your inventory, maybe by quantity or by name. But the point being is love your town hall and be very deliberate about what you do, all right? So don't sit there and build a farm because it feels good or do something, because you feel like it kind of thing. Well, unless you want to do that. But if you're trying not to kill the town, be very deliberate and embrace the town hall. Okay? Okay. No, so my last point here, and truthfully, I've lost track of how many points that was, but let's just go with it, is when you're trading, when you build a trade dock, trade deliberately and with a plan. So, and don't just put random stuff in there unless you're really in a desperate situation. So think about the value add chain, right? So if you buy logs, for example, at 2 or whatever they cost, turn them into firewood and sell that for 4. That's a value add, right? If you have lots of foresters making logs, you can make firewood and sell off the excess, which is actually what I'm doing here. So really think about your plan, right? And as you can see here, I had 3 forest nodes going, and I'm actually buying logs as well too. And I've built 10 woodcutters. And I've got the woodcutter or the firewood limit at 3,000, which is ridiculous for a town this size. But it's because I'm selling, or I may be using 1,000 at a time out of each trader. So you need to have these guys working ahead of time and building a buffer. The other things that commonly people can trade are coats, and herbs are good because you need a few herbs for your plus half a heart of health. But the excess herbs can actually be sold for 4. That's a pretty good one. Now, some people sell food and some people sell ale, which is derived from food. Um, I'm kind of philosophically against that myself. It'll work, but I find the surest way to die or kill a town is to be out of food. So I find selling off food, even with a good value add that ale brings to that, it is a bit dicey, right? So do it if you want. Ale in particular works well. But for me, I try not to do that. The other thing is when you're managing these trading posts, keep in mind you don't have to do anything manually, right? So every trader that comes, you can set up orders, right? One time only or every time. And you can set up auto purchase, right? So I like to use when merchant arrives. So you can see here I've got this set up to auto purchase 600 logs, 200 stone, and 200 iron. So the way that works is the merchant will pull up, and because this is on arrival, the auto purchasing will occur. When I go in to look at that trader, I'm going to see two things. I'm going to see what the trader has left, and I'm going to see what I have left in the way of trade goods. And I can make a decision at that time that, well, they've got a few more logs. I'm really short of logs. I'll buy them. If you're doing something else and you're busy with the auto trading on, you don't have to worry about it, right? It's going to auto trade. Um, so with these general posts, my particular auto trade is only going to apply to a certain type of merchant, but that's okay. When the merchant of that type shows up, there's the auto purchase set up, right? You can do the same thing with food and other things as well too, right? So the key thing on trading is have a plan, have a strategy to get the resources, to pick the particular resources. Also play around with it too and see what stuff is worth as far as trading and really think about that value add chain. It's okay to buy logs for cheap and sell expensive firewood, for example. Okay, so that's my point on trading. And I guess my last point here is um, this is a great game, so have a ton of fun and also consider adding mods. The modding community for this game is just absolutely outstanding. There's tons of mods. My personal favorite is Colonial Charter or Mega Mod, which includes Colonial Charter. If you get into the bigger mods, I have little bit of advice for you. Don't be overwhelmed by all the choices in there. Mega Mod 9, for example, has 400 mods. You go into the menus and you go, oh wow, there's a lot of stuff here. So my advice would be play vanilla. If you after you load Mega Mod, just play vanilla and add a few things here and there. Experiment a little bit. Don't overwhelm yourself with new stuff. The more towns you do, the more things you can play with, and you'll get into a bit of a exploration mode where you can try different things, right? So I highly encourage you to do that. Also on the forums and Reddit and stuff like that, this community is super friendly and super helpful. So hit the forums, hit Reddit, and most most I would say all YouTubers will answer tons of questions as well too. So please feel free to ask questions, make comments, give feedback, all that stuff. We're all friends here. It's a wonderful world. All right, so I'm Derpy Moose 99. That's my strategy to kill less towns. I won't say it's going to work 100% perfectly, but if you follow those general concepts, I think you'll be pleased with the results. Thank you and have a great day.